the Chey and Pav podcast experience.
Okay, stop.
You're listening to the Chey and Pav Show, Teachers Talking Teaching. We are two middle school teachers sharing our reflections and insights about the topics that matter the most in the classroom. Join us in the hallway, the parking lot, or even in the staff room. Welcome to episode 135 of the Chey and Pav Show. Thank you for joining us as we sit around the table to talk teaching. In today's episode, we're talking about class size and the impacts of large and complex classes on learning outcomes. I expect some great banter with this conversation, so let's jump right in. My name is Pav, and I'm half of this dynamic duo. My co-host is here with me, and he usually introduces himself.
I'm going to give Pav an offer she can't refuse.
I'm waiting for the offer.
Because I am the podfather. But I'm not really.
No, that's Stephen Hurley.
True. Facts.
Yeah.
Pav, welcome to the Chey and Pav Show. And our audience, welcome. As you were right, we want to talk about class size.
Yes, that's right.
But before we get there, let's talk about what's new, what's happening, what's going on, what it is.
We're still recording off of TV dinner tables, and not
But we do have big plans for a set.
all the furniture is here. It's just all sitting in boxes.
Facts.
Just waiting for a free weekend whenever that's going to arrive.
2032.
I guess so. Everything's been sitting in boxes. Just, it's the new furniture in my room. Boxes of furniture.
It's going to look great. We do have some plans, and we are
Yeah.
excited to sort of dive into that space and sort of bring some fresh new content to the Chey and Pav shows. We sort of
Yes.
strive to build more visual content. But let's move away from there, Pav. We've had a busy...
Okay. What's next?
The offer was not that I was going to build this furniture.
Okay.
I'm still
Well,
waiting.
I'm still waiting for that offer. This furniture's all staring you in the face. All these boxes. I'm just going to keep piling them up.
Insert cricket noise now. But Pav, we've had a busy week, busy few weeks, because what teachers don't have busy few
No.
weeks? But we were recently at the Unleashing Learning Conference, and we had a great, we had two different roles, because I was just a participant in regards to absorbing content, absorbing sessions, learning a lot about AI, learning a lot about mind maps, and I had a really great experience connecting with my DLL group, my digital lead learner group, and just finishing off our first year. But you, as a year 3 graduate,
Yes.
you had a little bit more responsibility.
Yeah, we were part of the digital playground, and we worked on a really cool Minecraft project involving Level Up Toronto. So it's a world that's been created surrounding Toronto. So it features a lot of the landmarks and areas of Toronto that we can kind of walk through. And the whole goal of the world is that there are these 3 decommissioned school sites throughout the city, and students are given the task of reimagining those spaces for human and other than human inhabitants of that land. And so it was really great to infuse a lot of Indigenous learning and Indigenous ways of knowing into the builds that students were creating. So a lot of teaching around those areas, and students really did a great job. So we were showcasing the work that we had done around that. So it was really cool. And yes, you're right. This culminated my DLL experience over the past. I didn't do it in 3 years. I took a couple of extra years. I did it in, I think, about 5. I took 2 years off in between. I took a gap year.
It sounds like my high school story.
Yeah, I took a couple of years off in between during that COVID time. So it was really nice to get back to it and then graduate from the program. So I'm looking forward to applying to be a DLL mentor for next year, which will be a really cool experience to sort of be able to give back to other DLLs and provide
Hold
some
on.
new learning.
Hold on. Is this provide the possible scenario that you would be my mentor?
It is entirely possible that I could be your. In fact, I am going to make that happen.
I was in my 12th year teaching when you were in teachers college.
That's not true.
15th.
Oh, maybe. But it would be really cool to kind of be in that role. I had some great mentors in the DLL program myself. And so it would be really neat to find myself in that position. So I'm excited to see what that brings and if that is a possible option for next year. So, but yes, a great experience with the Digital Lead Learner Group. Absolutely do it if you are in Toronto and you're able to participate in that group.
And even if you haven't been part of that group, come to the conference, come to the workshop. Your administrators got passes. Mm-hmm. Now, we know in the shortage of the ability to get supply teachers, sometimes it could be a challenge. And, Pav, you and I have talked about this off camera, that this is not a reality that's about to be solved in 5 new rules.
That's right.
For your school. It's a little bit deeper than that. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. But I digress. Mm-hmm. If you can get to this conference, get to this conference. There's so many. I love the way it's set up. You have your keynotes, your sessions that you break into, your 30 or 45-minute sessions. But then you have this marketplace and this playground that really allows you to guide your own learning, float around, take a look. Like, I loved my sessions on AI technology. I picked those. I floated around the marketplace, and you looked at me and said, "Take my picture, take my picture."
Mm-hmm. And you didn't. Facts. 0 pictures of me in the digital playground. I saw you sitting in the corner on a chair on your phone for a good 15 minutes while I was presenting.
A teacher cannot be away from school and not get inundated with all kinds of emails that are urgency culture oriented that need to be immediately dealt with. And then when I walked through the marketplace, I did enjoy running into a little session on My Maps.
Right.
And I said, you know what?
Google My Maps.
Yes, yeah. Google My Maps. And it reminded me how many tools teachers we use once or twice, and we have these great ideas with them. But if they get out of our sort of it's like laundry. Like, I got lots of t-shirts, I got lots of different sweatpants, and I got lots of different shorts, but I get in a rotation of about 7 Monday through Sunday. And every time I watch it, they go in the bin, and I never reach for anything else because those 7 are in the mix. And this happens with my teaching. I got 20 tools I can reach to, but I'm only repeating the same 5 or 6 or 7 all the time. And then I forget that I had this tool. And, Pat, we had gone to a My Maps, and you had been using My Maps, and I had used it a few times. And then I lost it.
Yeah.
And then I walked by and said, oh my gosh, I used to use My Maps. Let's go back to this session and sort of reinvigorate myself. It sort of reminds me of the complexity of teaching, or the simplicity of teaching, or the need to be simplistic. You get these 5 or 6 great sort of strategies and pedagogies that you're using, and you don't willfully choose to ignore or forget others, but they fall out of the playlist.
Yeah, they're just not in the rotation, as you mentioned, and which is why this, like a marketplace like this, is so great, because they're small little sessions that are meant to be just like 3 to 5 minutes long, just for people walking by. But you are able to sort of give the highlights of the tool that you'd like to discuss and talk about and present. And then you, as the teacher that's walking by, is either like, wow, this is really cool. It's new. I've never heard of it. Tell me more about it. Or it's like, oh yeah, I learned about this already, and I completely forgot that I had it in my tool belt. So it's really cool to reinvigorate that. And yeah, I don't use my maps as much anymore because I haven't taught social studies or history geography in some time, and it's really a great tool for that. But what I love is finding a tool like this and finding ways to infuse it into a subject that you wouldn't consider to be part of that tool. Like my maps, you think geography, but it would be really neat to infuse my maps into math or science in some way. And that really excites me, and is finding ways to use these tools in the unobvious subject areas. So that's always what I like to have as a goal in the back of my mind when I'm teaching a subject. Like, what tools can I possibly bring into my math programming that, normally I wouldn't consider this could be a math tool. So I really like that. And I like thinking about how I could possibly use my maps in math. And off the top of my head, I can think of several ways, but I got to work through it and make sure it's embedding itself into my program. Yeah.
I could be really sassy with my tongue in response to that. Oh. Not in regards to your content, Pav, because you could be my mentor next year. But I was just thinking, you could just pretend you'd done all those 7 or 8 different ways of using my maps and present yourself as if you had. And tell teachers, if you did this too, you wouldn't have any problems in your classroom.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the problem, right?
Yes. But can I say I digress? I guess I already have for the second time.
Yes.
Pav.
Yes.
I'm going to make you an offer. You can't refuse. What are you doing on May 16th?
Oh, I'm actually busy on May 16th.
Oh, really? Do tell me. What is going on May 16th that keeps you from responding to my request for what you're doing on May 16th?
On May 16th, you and I actually are hosting a book launch for Amplifying Our Practice, Teachers Talking Teaching, our new publication. And so, yes, that is going to be a busy time. It's actually already a busy time as we plan for this launch event.
Let me quote my students. Let's go! May 16th, the Chey and Pav book launch celebration. You are invited, especially if you live far, far away. We know we have listeners in Texas. We will save you a spot.
Yes. Absolutely. We would love to see you. So if you are thinking about coming to the book launch, and we hope that you are, please reach out to us and we will send you an invitation to that event.
I think we should put a link in the show notes.
We absolutely can.
And of course, there is one on Twitter.
Yeah.
And Instagram. And the only reason we want you to fill out the form is so we know just a rough idea of how much drink and how much food to sort of get laid out on the tables. But
That's right.
Looking forward to a 5 to 7 for you teacher types.
I'm going to say 5 p.m. and onwards. We're not going to limit it to 2 hours. Some of us teachers are partiers.
Well, I'll make a sweeping generalization. Those primary teachers, they needed to know 5 to 7.
Maybe.
Us middle school teachers,
so.
We can go off the cuff a little bit more.
Yeah, I just don't like. I don't like putting limits on things.
But we are really excited and really looking forward. And we were. We weren't sure if we should do it or not, and then we finally got I think the right push from people to say do it, because if you don't do it, you'll always look back and say,
yeah,
you didn't do it.
Well, for me, it was when I got the comment of, you worked hard and you deserve the celebration for yourself, not for anybody else. This celebration isn't for the people who are going to be attending. This is a celebration for us and our hard work, and I feel good celebrating this project because it was a long and difficult project. So I'm very excited about it, and I'm very excited to celebrate the launch of this
So
book.
Please come celebrate with us. Toronto, May 16th, 5
onward.
And we would love to chat with you, take some pictures, celebrate, toast, eat a little bit of cake. And, maybe talk about the book just a little bit.
That's right. We'll be selling books and we'll be signing books there.
And we'll be right back, because you're listening to the Chey and Pav Show.
Teachers Talking Teaching.
Put your hands up, yeah. To the floor.
And you're listening to the Chey and Pav Show. All right, Pav, we are back, and we're here to talk about class size. Does it really matter?
It absolutely does.
Please, elaborate. Tell me more, Pav.
Yeah, okay, so I'll start. It's not just the class sizes, it's also the complexity of the classes that exist. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. When I started teaching, there was this conversation of class sizes has been in existence since I started teaching, and that was 17 years ago. And I'm sure this conversation has existed long before that. And I remember probably in my first year of teaching, there was a conversation about the size of classes. And, 30, 32 was normal, 33, 34 was normal for classes. And I started off teaching grade 6, and I've taught grade 6 for majority of my career. And I remember an administrator at the time telling me and telling a group of teachers that there actually is no difference in the teaching that you do for a small class versus a large class. And that stuck with me for a really, really long time, because in my experience, I knew that wasn't true. Me as a classroom teacher, being in front of 30 kids, 32 kids is very difficult to manage. And so in my gut, I felt like that isn't true. That doesn't feel right to me, and that's not right in my experience. But if the administrator is telling me this, and this is part of my naivety when I was, a new teacher, then I'm probably doing something wrong. And I'm probably not teaching these students properly if I can't manage a class size of 32. And I'm sure there was a little bit of gaslighting happening at the time. Like, of course you can do it. Of course you can do it. But then there was also a belief system back then that there actually wasn't any difference between a large class and a smaller class, even though my instincts and my experience in the classroom told me otherwise. And it took a long time for me to be able to articulate and really be able to advocate for those smaller class sizes over the course of my career, because there were always naysayers. There were always people saying, it's the same thing. If you can do it with 24 kids, then you should be able to do it with 34 kids. And so that bothered me a lot back then, because I knew against my own judgment, I knew that wasn't the case. But I didn't say anything because I was gaslit into believing that I was the problem as the classroom teacher, that I wasn't doing something right to be able to teach a class of 34 kids. So we all know, I hope that we all know that a smaller class size is far better for pedagogy, for our learning environments. But I think that that's something that we are going to be talking about today, and how that is possible and why those large classes actually really don't work for our learning environments. Chey, what do you have to add to that?
Pav, you touched upon a bunch of great things. I took a few notes. I quickly jotted down pedagogy, because this is a rant. I don't know if I've gone on in this podcast or just you and I were eating lunch. This disproportionate, willful act to bring everything down to going on and teaching and learning to teacher pedagogy. If only teacher pedagogy was better, class size wouldn't matter. If only teacher pedagogy was better, we wouldn't have behavior issues. If only teacher pedagogy was better, our students would read better. It is such a setup to gaslight on a general sweeping statement by me, but predominantly true more often than not, is that we never talk about so many of the things that are critical, like schedules and support schedules and duty schedules and resource support. Those things are untouched, unspoken of. But if we can somehow hint that a teacher's pedagogy would somehow save the day, or teachers aren't teaching well enough and it's your pedagogy that's the problem, it gives so much of our system, so much of our deep swamp, so much of our central, such an pass on critical thought of what they are doing and whether it be purposeful or non-purposeful, they're putting forth. So I know teacher pedagogy always wants to get better. We always want to be better. But you hinted on that there is a instinctive setup to make everything about pedagogy so no one else other than the teacher feels guilty about outcomes. And everyone can sit in their white picket fence homes and say they've done their job a little over the top, but being over the top is what gets people's attentions, so moderates can make the real impact. And I use the word impact, Pav, because as you talked about, you know what, there's a half-truth to what that principle, not that principle, because it's not necessarily that principle. I'm sure that principle was being fed lines by other folks. Your teaching is absolutely, I could argue, the same with 20 versus 30. Now, of course, this is another metric to measure. What do we talk? We talk about big class or small class. What's the metric? Is 26 is the difference between 26 and 25 insignificant? Almost insignificant, although there is data to suggest even a number drop of 1 is a significant metric when evaluating like test scores. Not that we want to say test scores is the most valuable metric for learning as I go all over the place, but back to teaching. Yes, you can make the argument that your teaching doesn't change from 28 to say 22. Perhaps the learning conditions you've set up haven't changed from 28 to 22. But that's not impact. That don't necessarily lead to growth. That doesn't necessarily lead to a desire for students to a self-fulfillment, to want to learn. We don't measure impact in those statements. So you could make the statement, and this is part of the nuances of gaslighting. You tell a half-truth, and no one in the mastery framework of learning, no one stops to just ever check what's being said originally. We build upon this false framework. You know, your teaching's not impacted by class size. Actually, that's true. But that's not what we want to measure here. We want to measure impact. Are students actually learning? Not how my teaching different, not are the learning conditions different. Are students reacting different to those spaces? And so when you talk about many of those things, you talk about the idea of wrong, and you highlighted that point of gaslighting. That reminded me of that idea of pedagogy. It's always teach, and not that teacher pedagogy doesn't need refinement, enhancement, PD. But if you stop and think about everything we talk about in our schools, it's always solely teacher pedagogy as the reason that things aren't going right, and we give a complete and utter pass to the maybe not the most important pillars, but when you add them all up, foundation on a percentage basis, a greater percentage of pillars are being left untouched, unscathed, unscrutinized. And so when it comes to that, you talk about what's the messaging that's coming out with proper class size, teaching and learning, those things haven't changed, or teaching styles and learning opportunities haven't changed. No, they haven't. But impact does. Because if you're a classroom teacher, it's not just a gut feeling. This is data.
Right.
This is data. When you think about our show, what's the value of our show? We don't get a chance to read all the books, but what we can tell you about is what's happening in the classroom. And we've talked about this before. I can tell you how a Big Mac combo can throw off your class for the afternoon. But an academic could never dare to that, because their data and their research they do never puts in the kid that shows up with the Big Mac combo 5 minutes after lunch and sees how that disrupts all your pedagogy.
Yeah.
So, Pav, that was my first thought on that component is what are we really measuring? What position, what sort of false truths are being told to allow this messaging to go across that we're okay with this class size?
Right.
Did you want to add on? Because I got a few more, but I know I've talked for like almost 4 minutes here.
No, I actually appreciate you mentioning that your pedagogy probably isn't teaching, but the outcomes are going to be different with your bigger class sizes. So that's, definitely something to consider.
If you need a metric for that, like feedback, my ability to give feedback to 20 or 22 is far easier than 28 or 29 or 30. And if you're thinking about class dynamic for all those people that haven't been in a classroom but speak on this so passionately, when a student knows there's a class of 30 and they know the period's only going 40 minutes, they know they can hide in the shadows. Right. And so they hide in the shadows.
I had that as a point as well, that it's much easier to hide in a large class and not seek, and this is true for introverted kids and also kids that are perhaps coming in with learning gaps and don't want anyone to know that they have those learning gaps, or there's something that they might be insecure about, and so that it becomes much easier for a student to hide.
I find often, Pav, the people that preach that class size doesn't matter are also the same people that preach that relationships matter. But let me tell you, when you're in the classroom, it's easier to... Now, I would always argue, do not form a relationship to try to leverage learning. You form a relationship to have a relationship, because as human beings, that's what's critical to the space. We learn how to treat people like protein-based life forms and even beyond. There's something to it.
Yeah.
But what we will find is that when we unconditionally commit ourselves to relationships, there is a greater enhanced learning space because there's trust behind the relationship.
Right. You build community.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that in the largest class I've ever had is 38. And I wouldn't go back and say the year was horrible, but I could mathematically tell you the chance that I could have any sort of interaction of significance with all 38 kids during the day is impossible. But I can also tell you definitively that the smallest class I've ever had was 12 during COVID, or just that first year where it was like, you choose hybrid. That year of 12, despite all the restrictions of COVID, may have been my best year of teaching. The freedom, and then this is where I can even go back and say, my teaching was actually enhanced by the smaller group size. I was able to take more risks, more chance, more student voice in those spaces because there was just a greater sense of community with 10 versus 12. So as a teacher, I do have truly vast experiences with size. I've had the 28s, the 25s, the 24s, the 22s, but I've gone from 38 to 12.
I would have to say, in a situation like that, where you actually have the experience of a massive class of 38 and a small, an intimate class of 12, and you were able to see the differences. And since this COVID experience, I also had a small class during COVID, but it wasn't quite 12. But what I have come to, build upon, because that comment that was made by that administrator early in my career really stuck with me. And I just couldn't figure out how to tell that administrator that wasn't actually true without just getting emotional and passionate and with my defense, but not really having any way to articulate it. If you are teaching in a sage on stage style towards that class of 38 and that class of 12, you can say that the teaching is the same for both. But that's not going to be the practical case, because when you have a class of 12, you can actually be a guide on the side. You can actually spend time with each student throughout the day and give them a good amount of your time, provide that feedback, and really get into the thick of what teaching is with that group of students. Perhaps in the beginning, some might say that, a class of 12 isn't good for introverted kids because they'll never find a way to open up. No, they will. Maybe that first couple of weeks is going to be a little difficult for those students that really don't like to speak up, because there's going to be more onus on them to speak up at some point, and that might make them nervous or anxious. But they will. They'll eventually get comfortable, and they will eventually open up. Maybe not as much as we hope for them to, but they will eventually become comfortable in that community, if that is that community that you have set up, and relationship building is a part of that. But if you're going in there and you're standing in front of the classroom and you're a sage on stage and you're just lecturing to the students, whether there are 38 of them or whether there are 12, absolutely, that's not going to make a difference. But I'm willing to guess that most teachers are not doing that in the classroom. Most good teachers are getting into it and want good pedagogy. And good pedagogy is not sage on stage type of lecture style teaching, especially for the elementary grades.
Great points. I would argue the teacher pedagogy, even if you could agree upon every teacher could be 2% better, I would say in all the other pillars of education, they could be infinitely better than that 2%. And the 2% won't bridge the gap for system inequalities. Right. Not even a chance.
Right.
Where do I want to go from here? You know what, Pav? I can talk about when you talked about your messaging from your principal, I can argue that as a young teacher, I actually subscribed to that without ever being preached to it. I actually thought Now, I had metrics. I always said when we were building classes, I always said, you know what, 2 or 3 students isn't that big a difference based on the fact that our students have accessibility to greater technology. There's more ways to reach students. And as an early teacher, I subscribe to that. I would go into classroom building sessions and say, you know what, I know we get fixated on 2 students or one class has 1 more student. And now in a real school environment, like that's what we're talking about when we talk about class size. The difference between a big class and a small class, I would probably say is 5, plus or minus 5, maybe 4. You know, you're talking 28, 24, or, you know, say 24 is your base. And I know in the 3 and under, it's capped at 20 and it goes a little higher, but around there, I would say 4 is sort of your number. 4 is your plus minus number between a big class and a small class. And I would always know early on in my career that I would always sit in those meetings and say, I don't want to get boggled down trying to make classes like 23 and 22 if they're 24 and 22. And I would make the argument, it's not that big a deal. Now, maybe it's not that big a deal for 2 when you're talking about the metric of 22, 24. But I come to the idea of technology because I was always, now this is earlier on, and I think how technology is used by students is vastly changing. It's rapidly changing. And so 10 years ago, I would have thought technology supports the idea of class size not mattering as much. And I wonder and I ponder if the people that are holding on to this position and keep sticking to this position are holding on to research and anecdotes that are outdated. And I think the term for this, maybe it's not even a technical term, it's a zombie lie. When we hold on to something that was true in the past, but the data reflects it's no longer true, yet we hold on to it anyways. And I think a lot of the rhetoric behind class size is the idea of a zombie lie, in the sense that maybe 10 years ago when technology was just starting to really impact learning, and not that it's not impacting learning, I just think it's impacting differently, that students, there was an excitement with technology. There was often more technology in the schools than maybe at home, or students weren't used to the new technology being brought into schools. And I think of it now that students are so complacent with their technology. It's assumed, it's there. There's no excitement because of the technology. I think of something like an iPad or a Chromebook. 10 years ago, you had to guard those like they were a bar of gold, man. You couldn't leave them nowhere. Kids leave Chromebooks, iPads, their phones everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. No one takes them. They have no fear, no thought that someone would even want this stuff. And I think this plays into the fact that although our technologies are stronger, our students aren't connected to our technology as much. There's that excitability with technology that can lead to engagement that isn't necessarily learning, but can be a gateway to learning, is gone. Our technologies are predominantly a distraction, and you really got to coach through it. So having done a little bit of research, because I actually did some beyond my research of teaching every day, was that the predication of that the classroom size doesn't matter often comes back to technology. And I think students' use of technology has become very complacent and is shifting rapidly, far more rapidly than the people that are selling these talking points are keeping up with. They're holding on to the zombie lie. And I'll give an example because, teachers can actually give you examples because they've lived through them. Am I really negative? Or am I just like really sharp?
Oh, you're just about, the same as you always are.
I'm giving everyone an offer they can't refuse. I remember when de-streaming became this big, not that became this big thing. It was this big thing. It's a big thing. It's a big shift. I'm not telling you right now what's working or not working because in the high school space, I can't. So I don't teach high school. But I can tell you what the messaging was coming across while I was going to PD sessions from people very prominent in our educational space here in Ontario that were, similar to yours, setting you up for the gaslight, setting you up for a teacher that, hey, class size doesn't matter. I'm telling you it doesn't matter. So if something's going wrong in your class, it's because of your pedagogy, not because we're throwing 39 kids, or that's a little over the top, 32 kids in your class, and just saying, because once you can commit to the fact, the false narrative that class size doesn't matter, then you don't feel the pressure or the obligation as a system to make sure the supports are in place, the schedule's in place, the duty schedule's in place that would support all of this large class size. Because you know what? If you're going to invest in a larger class size, you better have the supports in place. And you know what makes supports, which we all know are thin, is you better have a schedule and a duty schedule that supports a support schedule. But when you make a duty schedule out of simplicity, I'm biting my tongue. And then you make a duty schedule out of simplicity, and then you don't bother to tie this into your support schedule, and then you just leave all the kids in that class because you convince everyone that it doesn't really matter, then it doesn't work. Because if you want to increase the class size, you better increase the supports, and it's not just because they have access to technology, and you won't be able to increase the level of support because it's just not available. So what are you doing with your schedule to maximize supports? And, we learned from Principal Bannerman, I'll drop a name, early on in my teaching career, he said, when you build a schedule, you know what you start with? Your most needy students. Learning and teaching. And I'm willing to bet that we don't put any of those factors in place when we build our schedules or our duty schedules or our support schedules. We just hope the numbers work and then come back to your original statement. Oh, you know what, teacher? There's no difference. The data suggests that the class size don't matter. Just change your pedagogy. While we've done all the things that are necessary to look at in order to facilitate the larger class, and we don't. So if you want to put a larger student body in my class, sure, go for it. What are you doing with the schedule and the support schedule to acknowledge that? And if you've done nothing and you haven't thought about it, then it ain't going to work.
I hope you all followed that. But I'm going to take us back so that we can fill in some of these gaps a little bit. But yes, the support schedules matter. But here's an important point that we need to cover that sort of makes all of this make sense. When I started teaching, we had a lot more supports that were available for students that were English language learners, that were special education students that perhaps needed their own space to sort of enhance their learning environment so that there were better outcomes for those students. And these were identified students who needed these supports, learning disabilities or developmentally delayed students. I don't think that that's the correct terminology anymore, but it is a term. It's DD is something that still exists, I think, in some classrooms or some schools. But classrooms now have become much more complex because these separate support systems, these placements don't exist anymore. There's no homeschool program. There's no program that exists in the school anymore where students, except in intensive support programs, where students are not in the regular classroom setting. So for myself, I might have this year 28 students, which is a large-ish class. I would say that the sweet spot for me has been around 24. So 28 is a little bit on the larger side. But what makes my classroom challenging are all of the complexities that exist in that space. So I've got a lot of students who are new to Canada this year, as of just a few months ago, who need English language supports. There are some things that I can do in the classroom in the moment to support those students, and technology and the use of technology is one of those things. But I wouldn't say that is good pedagogy, just dumping everything to Google Translate. What I would really like is a support staff member or a support teacher, an ELL teacher, who can provide me with resources that I may not be privy to and definitely do not have as supports in my classroom, as resources in my classroom, to be able to support these students. That's something that is different. Students who would have been in the homeschool program or in a more intense learning environment where the class size is much, much smaller and there are more human resources in that classroom space to provide them with the supports that they need, are now in in this classroom of 28 with all kinds of distractions, like that Big Mac combo that shows up 5 minutes after lunch, who need supports. And those supports just don't exist anymore. We don't have them in our school system anymore because the funding has been so drastically cut. So we don't have these staff members. We have gone from having 3 or 4 resource teachers, spec ed resource teachers, to having one. And that one teacher has to be spread out through the entire school, providing support for everyone. Now, we can maximize that teacher, which often isn't done. But even if that teacher was fully maximized, you're still talking about a group of 7 or 8 students every period that teacher has to look after. And that, again, takes us into a situation where how good can your programming be in that space if you have to accommodate for every grade level, every single period? So that it is definitely very complex. And yes, as you mentioned, the schedule that we create in the school has to start with the support that we provide for those students first. That has to be looked at first before we can create any other schedule in the school. So that is something that I absolutely 100% know has changed drastically since I started teaching. There were far more specialized supports for English language learners and special education students that were available in the school setting, which are now completely decimated. They are gone. I am responsible for all of that in my classroom. So with like maybe once a week, 1 period a week support from another staff member in the school. So yeah, I feel it with a class of 28. I've had bigger than 28 before, but I feel it more now than I did when I had a class of 34. So that is what has changed in our school systems now, and that is why this is not sustainable.
Those are great points, Pav. I like the fact that it's not the 30 class of 32 that swamps me. It's the 28 with just not enough investment in supports. And you brought up so many reasons that our supports are lacking, predominantly funding. And I jotted down here, this is where, like on a system level, I know I keep picking on the system because the system pats themselves on the back for the inclusion model. But the inclusion model at their level is everyone in the class, and then they strip all these things down, which comes back to my point that I guess I never made about de-streaming, is that de-streaming doesn't work if you don't commit to the supports required to make it work. And early on, I know when they just started, that wasn't the messaging that was coming across. It was similar to your principal messaging. The messaging was, we're going to de-streaming, and I'm not against de-streaming, but I am against it when it's built on false narratives. Mm-hmm. And the narrative there was class size didn't matter. And what I'll admit, I'm not talking from experience. I do not teach grade 9 math, but I actually do have grade 9 math teachers that are friends, and they'll tell you it's not working. And it's not working predominantly because of the vastness of where students are at in their learning. Now, how do you bridge that? They're not saying that they need to be split or streamed because of it, but there's no supports that help advance that. And it comes back, reminds me of the inclusion model, where system-wide we pat ourselves in back for these great inclusion models. But what is inclusion really looking like in the classroom? And I would venture to say that it's more exclusive in the space, but just putting everyone in the classroom and, you know, over the top, this dog-eat-dog world, it's not that beneficial for everyone. And so from afar, from the deep swamp, you can talk about we've instituted the inclusion model, but in a micro level, in the microcosm in the classroom, I don't know how included everyone is feeling when students are left to just sort of fend for themselves or hide in the shadows because they're feeling a little bit inadequate and left on their own. Mm-hmm. And then what we do is we just fixate on teacher pedagogy. And you're right, with 28 and 1,000 different needs, or maybe that's over the top, 10 distinct different needs, I don't know how you think a teacher can facilitate that day after day after day. Right. The pedagogy is not the problem.
100%. I'm going to bring it back to the technology piece. I've had people tell me with students that, you know, have trouble with writing or have trouble with ideation or idea generation for particular topics or whatever. And I've had people tell me, well, just have the students use speech to text. They can do that, right? Like that's something that they can do. That's something that they can do to help support them in the classroom. And I said, and I responded with, how easy is it for that student who's already feeling inadequate to turn on their speech to text in a quiet classroom where everybody is typing away on their computers and just start talking? Have you ever tried to do that in a staff meeting when you're trying to follow along with something and everybody's working on something, you just randomly start talking in the classroom. Or you ask the teacher, hey, I need to use my speech to text. Can I go out in the hallway? And then 6 other kids in the classroom are saying, why does she get to go out in the hallway? Or why does he get to go out in the hallway? Or where is she going? Where is he going? What are they doing out there? It's the same thing. There's a level of embarrassment that is felt, and I hate when people tell me, well, why don't you just do this with the technology? It's now it's placing all of the responsibility on a tool that it's not going to work the way that teachers or that people think it's going to work, especially if they don't have that experience inside the classroom and what it looks like with a classroom dynamic. You got very excited for a second. What were you going to say? You were going to jump in.
I was. When you said, oh, they can just use
Speech to text.
And I was like, yeah, but only 2 of them will even have any idea how to, even if you teach them how to. And I don't mean to totally gaslight students, but again, that falls under the narrative we've talked about before. This assumption that students are really
savvy
in tech spaces, and they're not. That is a false narrative over and over again.
No.
There are a few students that can consume content, and a few students can figure out these spaces.
Yeah.
But despite the fact that they have access to technology, or maybe it's because they have constant access to technology, they actually don't have these spaces.
Right.
So the more and more you teach them about them, they still, and I loved your point, Pav, but the simplicity of just let them use. It's not just, they're not about to use it. They're not intuitively about to use it. It's the technology space is actually, and I'm a huge technology fan, but I've certainly seen a shift in how students can negotiate the technology space, and maybe a part of that is the engagement or the excitability. The simplicity and always having access to tech actually makes students less likely to learn about the tech. Right. And I've actually found that. Pat, these have been great points.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been great. I'm looking to see if there's anything that I haven't touched on before already.
You know, one thing I talked about is, on my notes here, Pav, is where are we collecting data that suggests that class size data? We talked about the technology piece, but where are we collecting, I'll talk generally, where do we collect our data from that sets up our notions of what should be working here? And I know in Ontario, we love to talk about Finland, and we'll pick one little piece of what's working in Finland and say, well, you know, this is higher in Finland, or this is working in Finland. And then we won't bother to take the complexities and the full spectrum of what they're doing to create their educational space, and we just piggyback on one thing. And I wonder if a lot of our notion of class size is extracting singular data points from other places of learning and not putting into the full account of all the other pieces,
the context,
that make that factor, you know, I don't know, less a factor, more a factor. But I often wonder, when we extract data from other places of the world, we put it in a silo, and we willfully choose to forget all the other data that allows that data to succeed. And so I'm not dismissive of class size data, but I'm very skeptical of where it comes from. I'm very much in the sense that there's some zombie lies here, because academic research is never current. It can't be, just by definition. You can't have academic research that is current at the time. And I think if anything we've learned from COVID is the absolute revolution of education in the virtual space, the tech space, and now the AI space. And so I don't know how you could have accumulated any research past that time to be able to give it to anyone else that even suggests that works. Because I will assume, unless you're talking about journals, academic journals, but any academic research, you would even think of our book, Pav, like we were really proud of our book, but some of that content is 4 years old. And even we as the authors, we still really proud of the content, and we feel it can still be applicable, but we're also quite aware that a little bit all of a sudden becomes really stale and really static.
Right.
And I think a lot of the positioning, the positionality, the talking points are holding on to stuff that's already outdated. And when we refuse to look for and seek teacher input on these conversations, and how do we do it? By always blaming their pedagogy for inadequacies in learning, is that we willfully choose never to bring teachers to the table to discuss, because I can tell you the academic research is important, but I couldn't tell you it's more important than what I saw in the classroom last week.
Right. Yeah. And I think that what the biggest problem is that it's hard to articulate all of those complexities when you're discussing what's happening in the classroom, because what's happening in yours isn't happening in mine, and what's happening in mine isn't happening in yours, but both are valid reasons as to why class sizes matter. So in a grade 6 classroom, that's going to look different. The behaviors will be different. The way that students react and respond to stimuli in the classroom are going to be different. The access to cell phones is going to be different in different classrooms. But all of these are different factors. I always dislike when people bring in those, like, as you mentioned, like those single point data pieces from different parts around the world because of the complexities. And I always disliked it when I heard it being presented, because in most of these cultures, it's a very homogeneous culture, and Toronto is extremely diverse, probably one of the most diverse places in the world. And you can't have that kind of a homogeneous culture in a place like Toronto. So that's probably first and foremost one of the reasons why something like that doesn't stick, right? And why you can't make that argument for why it works somewhere and not somewhere else. So yeah, it is, those are interesting points, but well said. And this conversation has been amazing, really great actually to talk about large and complex class sizes. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about, or are we ready to wrap this up for today? It's been 51 minutes.
We said we'd do it in 30.
Well, we always say we'll do it in 30. When has that ever happened?
Never. Actually, episode 2 is 20 minutes.
Is it? No way.
Yeah.
I got to go back.
Episode 2, I think it's on music, or maybe it's on Twitter.
Oh.
Not that it's on Twitter. I mean, the topic is Twitter. I think our second episode is 20 minutes.
Now, have we done an episode on class sizes before?
Nope.
Are you sure?
Yep.
Did we plan for one?
Maybe.
Okay. That's probably what I'm thinking about.
Could be on a list.
Yeah.
Somewhere in our notes.
Yeah. That could
Topics
be
to
true.
talk about. Let's do a commercial and come back with a swag bag. Because I don't think I did a swag bag last time, because I did a swag bag before we did swag bag.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Okay, let's go.
Right. You've been listening to the Chey and Pav Show.
Teachers talking teaching.
We're going to make an offer you can't refuse.
Get your hands up to the floor.
And you're listening to the Chey and Pav Show. And this episode is brought to you by the proud sponsor of Duty Minutes. Because if you want a school to function properly, just make sure you give every teacher 80 minutes of duty and 10-minute denominations.
Get your hands up to the floor.
And you're listening to the Chey and Pav Show. I can't wait to get the check from Duty Minutes.
It's going to be a big one.
If I get $1 for every minute.
That's $80.
We use the math teacher. The class they taught that to me, I was in a big class, so I missed it.
You missed it. You were hiding in the back, in the shadows.
In the shadows. I was speaking into my computer, though, with voice to text, because someone told me that would do it all. And then walked
Just
out.
use speech to
Just
text.
use speech to text, eh?
It works every time.
Improve your pedagogy and you would solve everything. All right, Pav. This has been a good conversation, a fun conversation.
Yes, it has been.
The key takeaways, you're not busy on May 16th.
Right.
We got a book celebration and you are invited, and we got a chair and we got some cake and we got some pictures to take. Mm-hmm. We'd love to meet all the people we've never actually met.
Right. And some of them are coming, and it's very exciting.
It's almost sellout, baby. It's almost sellout.
Actually, it is already sold out, but we will make space for you.
For you, we got room. For you, I got room for you. But this has been a good conversation. And you know what, Pav? You know what our podcast tells us by our listens or our download is what matters to people. And sometimes we're shocked by which episodes don't get a lot of listens. Not that they don't get a lot. Like, I don't want to say a lot. We have a really great, loyal audience. We always get a good listenership. But it's always interesting to know what is resonating with our audience. What do people want to listen to? When you think about what is raw data Now, there's other factors involved, but we know that when we look at our downloads, sometimes we're surprised. And sometimes we're always surprised. Sometimes on the positive, sometimes on the negative. And I can think of our Thinking Classroom episode. We really thought that one was going to crush. And it not that it went poorly, it didn't crush. But our cell phones episode crushed. And it was just a reminder of what does this data tells us? It reminds us what's really important to teachers. Because although we don't know who listens to us in regards to their profession, we assume that it's teachers more than anyone else.
That's right.
Teachers want to hear teachers talking teaching. And the cell phone one ranted. And when we talk about, we didn't really get into the anecdote of why we wanted to talk about this. But Pav, you know why we chose to talk about this? Because cell phones to us, when we recorded it, seemed a little superficial. We said, it's cell phones, it's fine, we can do it. But when we did Thinking Classrooms, we thought we had a hit. We thought we had a hit record.
Yeah.
It was fine. Cell phones, we didn't think we had a hit record with cell phones. And all of a sudden, it's like, you know what? Cell phones is what matters. And that sort of linked to the class size, because I think we didn't do class size because we sort of thought it was a little... It's just a little blah.
Yeah.
But cell phones we thought was just a little blah. But it wasn't. People want to talk about cell phones because teachers want to talk about cell phones because they know that derails classrooms in a hurry. As fast as a Big Mac.
Right.
A student that's got a picture on their phone of a student doing something, it derails your class for 30 minutes the same way that Big Mac combo derails your class for 30 minutes.
Absolutely. Have you done that swag bag yet?
No, but I see you're checking your social media, so...
I'm already on Twitter.
We must have got someone, as we were recording, must have gone onto the Google form and said they're coming. You must have got a notification.
Oh, there we go.
There's the music.
That's... Thank you.
I didn't even do it last time, but I can see that you're out of juice. And in this class size, it's only class size of 2. So if one of us is out of
That's
juice,
right. The other one's got to pick up the slack.
Gotta go. I can't just hide in the shadows on this show, because then this episode would sound like this. But it won't sound like this. Our swag bag on class size, I think for me is, as teachers, slow the amount of the positionality of what people are selling you and stop it. Evaluate where it's coming from. Is it a setup for gaslight? Teacher pedagogy, teachers, we always want to get better. But how often are we solely led to believe that only us getting better is the only possible solution or cause for poor outcomes in our class? There are so many other factors that are constantly given a complete and utter pass if we can put in teachers' thoughts that it's them. And teachers always want to get better, but it's not on us alone to get better, so that other spaces like system, rules, and regulations and accommodation and supports can just get a pass. I think that was key swag bag. And the other swag bag when it comes to class size, Pav talked about this. It's not that 32 is worse than 30, because there's so many other factors in our spaces. These things all matter. So it's not just solely about making it 28. What type of supports are we getting? What type of technologies do we have? What does support look like? Is it just advice, or is support a program? Is support a hybrid where it's a withdrawal when a student needs a withdrawal, or is it within the classroom? Is the withdrawal a program being offered, or is it just I'll just help you with what you're doing with the student? And these things really matter. And I think that part of the component, how many schools have a support system where it's really transparent what's being offered and what's being expected, instead of, oh, I'll just show up in your class and I'll help you. That can be effective, but is it transparent? Is it planned? And I think with the idea that our supports are so minimal based on our funding, we need to maximize that support, and having a plan for our support is crucial. Pav, you got a swag bag for me? I got those 2 items.
No, I think you covered that. The complexities in the classroom is a really big one. That's something that's changed very much over the last, since I've been teaching at least, and most recently over the last 5-10 years. So I think it's important to mention that, and it's important to really focus in and zero in on that factor, that the classes are more complex, and we need to address those complexities.
And Pav, I'll come back to our last swag bag. It sort of it links to my idea for number 1, but linked to your idea is the silo of how information from other spaces is being delivered to us? Do we have the full context of what those spaces are doing in order to facilitate and make the argument that a 32 doesn't really matter?
I think that's perfect. We covered a lot in this episode, and it was a really great conversation. So I thank you for that. And I thank you, listeners, for being here with us for this conversation.
And we'll see you all
on May 16th.
May 16th. We'll cover half of your flights. Well, maybe three quarters.
Don't say
maybe
that.
A quarter. Maybe a percent. Maybe one. Okay, we'll
cover.
If you cover in Texas, we'll give you a loonie. You've never seen a loonie before. We'll give you a loonie for your flight.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.
And you've been listening to the Chey and Pav Show.
Teachers talking teaching.
Let's go.